Oops, things are freezing on Discord's end. There we go. All right. Hello and welcome to another exciting session. Just to check, as always, if anyone can confirm that you can hear and see me, that would be lovely. Whoa, I am a huge polar bear, I see. Wow. Okay, that's a little scary. Let me see if I can fix that. What are you doing, polar bear? Why? Why? That's a scary polar bear. Why would you be so scary? Well, he's not gonna get fixed today, so he's just gonna be a scary polar bear looking right at you, judging you. That's okay. All right. Let us see. People confirm they can hear and see me. That is good. Now, as the just suggested schedule goes, where is that? We are planning on mainly talking about chapter 3, which is general problem solving. That does not mean we have to, but I will give priority to those questions so that we don't fall behind. But if there is a lull in the questions, we can certainly um, go back and talk about other things as well. And that is, of course, mainly chapter 3 on general problem solving. So there are already some questions. Let me know if I missed one. The first one's 3.4, 3.5, 311. Now, do I assume those are problems or exercises? The exercises are discussed in the video, so I'm guessing they are the problems. I will also say, where are we now? Problems, problem. A little zoomed in. 3.4. Now, the order in which these strategies are listed in the book doesn't mean anything. Trial and error, guess and check is listed as the last one, but in many ways it's the first one. Sort of a guided, educated guess and check, not random, is a very good strategy at the elementary school level. And of course, building on that, we can then be a little bit more sophisticated with tables and lists and all kinds of stuff. So the categories that I broke it up into, doesn't really mean anything. It's just sort of a guide that there are different approaches to these problems, and I shouldn't feel stuck with trying to get to one thing. Just let the problem be what it is. That's the general idea. Let the problem decide how I'm going to approach it. Okay, 3.4. No confirmation that that was actually a problem. 3.4. There's a difference between problems and exercises, but still. Now, 3.4 is a very good one to illustrate what I just talked about. That it really depends on my experience. If I talk about problem 3.4, let's read it first. One number is 4 times as large as another number, and their sum is 5,285. What are the two numbers? Now, we really have sort of our foot in two different places, or whatever the saying is, the expression. That, first of all, we have to be able to do something, solve a problem for our own purposes. But we're also thinking about, well, what if I were to teach this to someone else? What if I were to explain a concept to someone else by way of this problem? How would I do that? Sometimes those two are the same, and sometimes they're not. And a question like this at a low grade, assuming they are comfortable with numbers in the thousands and they've done multiplication for 4 times, this is very much an elementary school level question. But at that level, even though the student can understand the question, their tools to solve this problem are very limited. They really only have a guess and check approach, but it's not random. Guess and check sort of gets a bad rap that it's not a random strategy. That would be horrible. It's more if I can have a guided approach through a guess and check strategy, then it's a very good idea to start out with something like that. So let's say here first number and then the second number and then the sum, was it? Why do I not remember my own question? The sum is 5,285. So the target here is 5,285. Okay. So now I know that the one number is 4 times as large as another. So let's say this one is 4 times as large as my first number. So once I pick the first number, then the second number is done and the sum is done. And I'm aiming for this target. So I guess, I have no idea. I'm pretending I'm little Timmy in grade. Let's go 4. I can understand the question. Now I have to guess. And kids are very hesitant to guess. They think, oh, I'm going to guess wrong. Yes, you are going to guess wrong. But that guess is going to give me information. And I can inch my way closer to the correct answer. So I have no idea. Let's guess 100. No idea. I'm not even bothering to be close. Then the other one is 400. And the sum is 500. And now I see, oh, I'm way off. But that's not a bad thing. I can now have an idea. Yeah, I need to increase this number. Let's try 1,000. Then I have 4,000 as my second number. And now I'm at 5,000. That's much closer. That's much better. So even though, yes, my guesses are wrong, that's not a bad thing. Being wrong is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, because my target is so close, I can think, ooh, well, I should now go just make small adjustments here. I can't be as radical as I was from my first to my second guess. So what if I try maybe 1,100? Then 4 times as much would be 4,400. And the sum of the two together, I'm picking easy numbers to do in my head, 5,500. Ooh, no, that was too much. Okay, so even that small change, that was too much. So let's scratch that out. I want to build a little bit smaller from this 1,000. So let's try 1,020. Then 4 times that is 4,080. And the sum is 5,100. And I'm literally just guessing. I don't know. I can't remember what the answer is. But you get the idea. You're inching forward. And then with just a few more guesses, you will eventually get to exactly what you want. Once you get the idea, I don't see any need for me to go through the guess and check all the way. You should be getting the idea of, I'll call it educated guessing. It's not guess and check feels, I'm just going to randomly pick numbers. No, you'll sit here forever. But if I look at what my guesses are telling me as I make them, then I have guidance and I am moving closer towards the target with pretty much every guess. So that's a very good strategy, one that I don't want to neglect. And actually, I'm not going to bother with the other one because at the end of the course, our very last topic is on variables and equations. And if I have that tool, then I can look at this and say, oh, I'll assign a variable for these numbers and make an equation, solve that equation. But that's a very late elementary school moving into middle school, high school territory. And I might not have that very powerful tool at this early stage, and that doesn't mean I can't do it. So I don't really want to demonstrate that here because it's not really the point. The point here is that guess and check can actually do a lot more than I think if I do it in an educated way, letting it actually work with me and not be random. How do we feel about problem 3.4? Will you be able to finish the question? You get the idea?
Stephen, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, so my question is, this totally makes sense. I used an equation to figure it out.
Oh, that's
Now,
totally
if
fine. Totally fine.
right, but I guess my question is, if something like this comes up in your test slash let's call it
Right,
a
right.
quiz, do you want to see this type of or do you want me, or can I still use like a formula
Yeah,
or
no,
equation?
that's totally fine. For the quizzes,
Mm-hmm.
we are answering the questions as we are answering the questions. We're not
Okay,
thinking about the
got
teaching
it,
side of things.
got it. Okay, perfect.
I guess the worksheets are trying to just keep the other side in mind. But I'm
Right.
not even gonna I'm not even gonna think about how would I teach this or what strategy would be appropriate in a quiz. I'm just doing it.
Okay, got it. Thank
Whatever
you.
you're more comfortable with, absolutely, yeah. And depending on our experience, some people I know may not be super comfortable with variables and equations, which is why we have a dedicated topic on that. And with this, I just want to highlight that it's not an expectation at this stage. All right. Let's see, what was the next one there? 3.5 as well.
Are we able to go over 3.3 as well? I kind of went
I
on a blank on
I
that
can
one. I feel like
totally
it's
I
really
can totally
simple.
go back. I am just doing them in
Sorry.
the order that they're appearing in the chat.
Oh, okay.
There's no order to what we're doing. We are jumping back and forth, and there's no order to these questions, these problems either. So put it in, and we will make sure we get to it. Um, yeah, don't think that these problems, the next one is more difficult than the previous one, and I need to do them in order. No, they're just this a bunch of problems with no order whatsoever. So we can definitely do that if you just remind me when we get through. But I want to respect the order in which people ask their questions. Although to be fair, I did say voice chat happens first, so I guess you do get bumped up to the top. That is fair. I have to be consistent, right? I said any voice chat happens first because it's way more efficient. So uh, I forgot about that. So let's do problem 3.3. I'm not going to try and pronounce this name, but he or she, oh, he gave his mother half of his weekly earnings and then spent half of what was left on a new shirt. He then had $32. What was his what were his weekly earnings? So what is the main strategy here? Would you say if you have to label a strategy?
When I did it, I worked
Yeah,
backwards.
it's obviously I have the end result. So working backwards in whatever way makes the most sense to you would definitely be the way to go here. So that was just a question of keeping track what happened and when. Let me just scroll down here. The nice thing for me about having a bad memory is I really don't remember the answers to these questions. I'm doing it as if it's seen for the first time. So I'm going to have to really read this to not make a mistake. But please always check up. I shouldn't go too fast. So he gave his mother half of his weekly earnings. So he had his amount, his starting amount. And you can call this whatever you want. Question mark. Let's put a box around it. That's what he starts with. Then he gave his mother half of that. So then he gave half of it. Okay. So then let's say here, whatever, that was the next thing that happened. Then he spent half of what of that amount that was left on a new shirt. So then he spent half of that. So let's call that whatever happened next, part 2. You can call this whatever you want, right? Whatever works for you. I'm coming up with this on the fly. And he had $32 left. So this would be 32 then, wouldn't it? Yes, no, maybe, sometimes, if I say so. Any reaction?
Yeah, it would be 32.
Okay, so there weren't that many steps. It's a 2-step process, which isn't that bad. So if I'm now trying to find this middle one, he spent half of something and he ended up with 32. So to reverse that, I have to double it to 64. So if I spend half of it, I'm going to have 32 left. And then going the one step further back to the beginning, he gave half of the question mark in a box amount to his mother. So, and then he had 64 left. So I have to double that again for 128. And then you can write a concluding sentence and do whatever you want to do.
Okay, wow, that is so much easier than what I was overthinking.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and I mean, that's often the case. The difficult thing with problems in general, just the pool of problems, that we should really not go in with our assumption of, oh, this is going to be the worst problem ever. This is going to be a hard one. I don't know what it's going to be. I just have to keep an open mind, and the next one could be super easy. The very next one I do could be more complicated, and then less complicated. I have no idea. Where's Chippendale? Chippendale is such a good one. Such a good one. It's probably the best working backwards
Stephen, can I interrupt for a
challenge.
sec?
Of course you can.
Just wondering, is that enough detail, what you've drawn there and written there? Is that enough detail to show our work? Like, will you be able to make sense of that?
I think so. Because I have these descriptions at the top, and the questions is also there. I think it's okay. I mean, if I wanted more, then I would have to do more right now. So I have to lead by example. If I do this, then yeah, it's sufficient.
Okay, thanks.
So there are little scribbles and little words, but always feel free if you want to write more, absolutely go for it. You don't have to feel that you need to limit your words on purpose. If you feel like, no, I want to write more, absolutely do. Absolutely. And in the test, it's a little different, admittedly, because I'm here to talk through this as well. So in order to save time, I don't write as much. So this is what I'm writing in these answers. Let's call this the bare minimum. But you'll see the test, there's more than enough time. If you have prepared that roughly hour for a quiz is still more than enough time. So feel free to write more. So that was 3.3. Going back to the first one, 3.5. 3.5. I went too far. So keep a note on 315. I'm not doing it because I want, I'll do it eventually maybe. Not doing it today because I want everyone who has not looked at this to really spend some time with Chippendale. It's so good. Oh, so good. I wish all problems were like this. Just a little bit more, I need to really read and think and carefully keep track. A longer working backwards problem, where some of them are quite short.
I just have to say, I tried the problems before I watched your lecture, and I stressed out about the man going to St. Ives, and then I felt so stupid after.
And those might not be. I don't want to say they're not quiz appropriate, but there are certainly more important questions for a quiz. Those are ones. There are some that you should see, but having seen them, you now sort of bank them somewhere in your memory and move on.
Yeah.
And that's certainly one of them, a classic one, yeah. But don't feel that, oh, it's just me, I feel stupid and everyone else got it. That is not the case at all. And knowing it, if I can imagine not knowing it beforehand, being asked it super fast, I would probably fall into the same trap. Yeah, it sort of plays on our human nature to just quickly answer. So we've done 3.3. Now 3.5 is very similar. Very similar. And if the problem with 3.5 is the fraction, totally leave it out. Because fractions come in part 4. If you're uncomfortable with fractions, sure, maybe you should be able to handle a half. But if the fraction portion um, is the part that bothers you, outside of that, it's almost identical to 3.3, isn't it? Upon receiving his paycheck, he spent a portion of it on car repairs, then bought a $40 gift. Yeah, let's do it. Fine, it was a question. Why not? I'm just being lazy. Problem 3.5. Okay, so same strategy. I have the end amount. I want to find the original paycheck. So paycheck, then something happened. What is the first thing that happened? Spent 2/3 of it on car repairs. Ooh, okay, it's not quite the same, is it? That's okay. Spent 2/3, so spent 2/3 of it. So then I have the next amount. And then, let's put it, I choked up there for a second. Then what happened? Then bought a $40 gift. So then spent $40. And then the end is 64. Okay, so I'm looking for this first one, right? So if he spent $40, that means he came from $104. Now this is where the fractions may or may not bother you. It's okay if it does. Don't worry about it. We're going to get to fractions in excruciating detail. So I'm not sure exactly what the issue was, but here he spent 2/3 of the question mark amount and he got $104. So to reverse this might not be as obvious to people, and we're going to get into a lot of detail um, when it comes to fractions. The of is always going to be a multiplication. So there is an equation hiding in the background that I should maybe look at to be as efficient as possible. I have a fraction times a number, and I get an answer of 104. Now, any multiplication sentence, you do those, what do they call them, fact families or something, where you have three numbers, you can write them with multiplication, you can swap the first two, you can write two division sentences. They're all the same relationship between the three numbers. So I can also write a division version of these three numbers and their relationship, and then I can calculate that. Now we have a calculator built in here. His name is MathBot. He's going to tell us the answer. And we get, let me undo this line. There we go, 156. So I can do a calculation in the chat box, in the chat as well. Just start with two equal signs and then normal calculation stuff, the slash being my division sign. And so we have our answer. Again, don't worry about the fractions right now. They do pop up to make things a little bit more interesting, but we have to do one thing at a time, and fractions and variables and equations come at the end, unfortunately. All right. 311, I think, is next. If I look, is my audio quieter today? My microphone is maxed. Cannot max it anymore. Try and turn your speakers up, maybe. It's hard to say. I don't think there's a day where it's ever perfect with no technical glitches. 311, I'm not going to do until maybe everything is done. It's really just some guess and check work happening. Let's just understand what we're being asked to do. Because some of these I don't want to. You're welcome to send me your attempt if you get stuck, and I could look at it and then better guide you without giving you the whole answer. Because for many of these, I know when they're more important than others. And if you just sit back, even if you've tried it, then I'm going to let him do it. If you just sit back and watch me do it, it loses all the benefit it can give you. And you can't go back and unsee it. So for some of these, they are definitely worth the struggle, and I'm happy to see partial answers or where you got stuck. Just send them all to me so I can better guide you. But I don't want to do them all without at least seeing that and maybe ruining it for other people. For example, Chip and Dale. Everyone needs to do that and spend a decent amount of time with that. This one as well. Let's just understand 311. 5 friends decided to give a party and split the costs equally. Al spent $4.75 on invitations. Betty spent $12 for drinks, $5.25 on vegetables. Carl spent $24 for pizza. Danny spent $6 on paper plates and napkins. Ellen spent $13 on decorations.
I think that the textbooks might be different because on my version, problem
Oh,
311.
don't say that.
Yeah.
That is not what I want to hear. Let me just triple check.
The 5 questions or the 5 friends is actually, I'm showing 313 in our textbook.
Yeah.
3.13. Yeah.
Okay, 1 second. I may have opened the wrong one.
Yeah, the one that's like ours is like the one that's like the sum question. Determine the following sums.
So this is the one that you download on the website. How are they not the same?
Yeah, so that's the same, yeah.
So then 311 is the sums one.
Yeah.
Ooh, what on earth is different? I'm going to have to look at that afterwards. Okay. Hopefully I did the early problems. They're the same. So I must have removed something from this one. Or there was a double up.
Yeah, the ones you were doing earlier were the same. It's just like this question, I guess, got
Oh,
changed.
I see. I see. Yes, yes. The little trick questions. The $50 borrowed and the hotel one with the rooms. Those 2 trick questions I removed to not confuse people. So they are in yours. So let's just clarify that. Okay.
So Stephen, just to I guess clarify those kind of those questions that like let's say the one that we were just talking about before, the trick questions. You're not going to have a lot of those, or
No,
will you have it?
yeah, I should say there are only 2 of them really, right? Well, the
Yeah.
St. Ives one,
Well,
apart from that, the 3 people staying at a hotel and the missing dollar, and the other ones also has a missing dollar trick to it. Those are just for fun. If you have nothing else to do, try and tell someone that problem fast and see the confusion. And it demonstrates how the wording can be done in such a way to lead you away from the obvious fact that there cannot be money missing.
And that was also similar to Becky's mother has exactly 3 daughters.
Yes,
I tried that
yes.
with my entire family.
Oh, really? What was the
Yeah.
response?
Everyone's like, June, June. I'm like, no, listen.
Oh, that's awesome. I gave the hotel one to my sister-in-law, who is a grade 4 teacher, grade 4 or 5, and it's because of the verbal uh, asking of the question. There's no time to stop and think.
Yeah.
You just go along with it, like, okay, there's a missing dollar. Wait, what? And she couldn't figure it out. And it's so hard to explain. You can ask someone, tell someone this question, and you get someone every now and then that completely believes that there is a dollar missing. And nothing you can say will convince them otherwise. They're completely falling for the question, even though it's impossible. You cannot convince them that the question is essentially trying to trick you. So some of these things, it's very interesting to know how difficult that this topic can be to teach someone else, to convince someone else, to understand it yourself. There's really no end to the general problem solving topic. So we are then doing the sums. Okay, that's a very important one for sure. Okay. So 311. Now some of these are easier than others. And if we understood the formula, we can certainly take shortcuts or not. It depends on what they look like. They have varying complexity. Let me just make a new page here. Okay, so we have different options, and neither one of them is better than the other one. We have our basic strategy that was done in the video, where if we have a sum, and all of these will be, now let me just make sure I have the right book here and close the other one. You should go away. Okay. The easy version is where I start with a 1, I go up by 1 up to a point. Those are the easy ones. Whoopsie, close everything. No. So my basic strategy is I start with my number 1, my first number, second number, and so on until my last number. It doesn't matter what they are. And then I write them in reverse, the last one, and then so on until I end with the first one again. Then I add them up, and these two will always be the same answer. These pairs will always give me the same answer for our kind of sequences. And when that doesn't happen, this strategy is not perhaps the best option. But we're always going to just look at those because we don't want to make it too complicated. Okay. And then the question is how many there are. Now, in the case of starting at 1, increasing by 1 every time, it's easy to see. There are 50 of them. They literally count themselves. But in some cases, this how many question is the sticky point. Now, that's always going to work. And then this is what I call my sum. There's the sum again. So when I add these same numbers up, I'm going to get double what I'm looking for. And I can then just divide this how many by 2 to get my answer. So that's going to work regardless. Some parts of it might be easier than others, but that's going to be the strategy. In the case where I have 1 plus 2 plus 3 and so on, and I end at some point, it could be 50, It could be 100, it could be 702, as long as it starts at 1 and the jump is 1. Then I can go through this basic strategy and derive a formula, which is n times n plus 1 over 2. There are pros and cons. The benefit of this formula is it's fast. The downside is it has to be a sequence that looks exactly like this. It has to start at 1. It has to jump by 1. It has to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to a point. And then that end point is what's used in the formula. Any variation on this, and it's not this exact formula. Then I have a choice, basic strategy on the more difficult sequence, if it doesn't look like this, or some adaptation of the formula needs to happen. Now, I would recommend you pick one of those options and stick with it. But for this problem, which is now the actual 311, number 1, we have a very simple case. Because it's 1 plus 2 plus 3, so all those requirements of the formula are satisfied, and I can say it's the end number times 1 more. Let me just write 51 over 2, and I'm done. Because it looked exactly right for the formula to be used. Okay, let me just pause for a second. Someone just joined the class and is trying to join the live chat, but needs permission. Yes, those things need to happen before the actual class, because it's hard for me to check all the chat. But let's quickly do that. Let's try and get to them. I don't even see them. Hold on. If I don't have that safety check of the permissions, then random stranger could join this and spam us. I don't see her. Yeah, but the name doesn't help me. It's the name you use in Discord. Oh, okay. It's a different different account. I see. All right. And then, oh, this is double. I was looking for the other person. I see Tina. I don't see the other person. Right. Anyway, as all the emails suggested, this needs to be done before the session, so we don't waste time in the session. But I can do a couple for sure. I missed one. I don't know where she is. Or he. No idea. Oh well. Okay, so Tina should have permission now. Everything should be good. It's all good. I just can't look at problems and the main chat and private messages. It's too much. It's too much. But if you draw my attention to one, it's all good. Okay, so now the question is, what kind of variations can I be looking at here? Well, one variation is they still go up in one step amount, but I don't start at 1. Now, these changed very slightly to really draw my attention to that. If I now start with a 2, then 3, then 4, all the way to whatever endpoint, I have 2 options. Let's do them both. And you decide. I like this one. I like this one. Almost always, you can choose which one. I wouldn't flip back and forth between them unless you're super comfortable with these things. But having some consistency, that was the theme of Tuesday. Consistency breeds confidence. Make that consistency. Look for that consistency. And picking one option to do always, as much as I can, helps with that. So the first option is the long strategy, but it's always going to work. And it's really not that long once I get the hang of it. So I'm going to look at my sum. I'll call it S for sum. And then I'm going to write it in reverse. So that's a 49, that's a 48, and of course the last one is a 2. And I'm going to add them up and of course then get double that sum. And they're always going to add up not to 50. goof, 52, 52, 52. And then I know, okay, this strategy is working. If all these answers are the same, then I'm golden, golden. The question is, how many are there? And that is the tricky bit that changes from one to the next. From one to the next. That is the part that is different. How many would you say? How many of these 52s are there? I know you're speechless. I know. It's so amazing.
Is it 49?
It is 49. Why?
Woohoo! Because it starts at 2, not 1.
Exactly. There's one missing from the 50 I had before. Now, it helps because I see the previous example. If this was on its own, maybe less obvious to some, but we're building it up. There are 49 of them. And with each one I do, I get more experience. So it does get better. So that means double the sum I'm looking for is now repeated addition, 49 terms, each value 52, 49 times 52. That's multiplication. So let's do it like this. 52, well, let's do it repeated multiplication, though it doesn't matter. 49 groups of 52 is 49 times 52, though flip it around, doesn't matter. So my sum is therefore that product divided by 2. Let's give MathBot something to do. Equal, 49 times 52 divided by 2. Whoops, random line. 1,274. Now, that's option 1. There's nothing wrong with it. It's really foolproof if you can get past that sticky point of how many. Sometimes it's a little iffy. So I just have to think carefully there. Option 2 is to somehow look at this sum, which I can see here at the top here. Somehow look at that sum, and if I want to use the formula, it's not formula ready. It's almost formula ready. It's not quite. 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way to whatever doesn't satisfy all of what the formula needs. It does have the jumps of 1, but it doesn't start at 1. But I can make it start at 1. But to keep the answer the same, I'm going to have to take 1 away. So I don't actually change what I have originally. Then I can look at that first section and say, well, that perfectly fits the formula. And so this bracket portion is then 50 times 51 over 2, but I can't forget my minus 1. Let us see what that answer is. 50 times 51 divided by 2 minus 1. Oh, it's the same. Is that a coincidence? No, of course not. Should be the same. I have 2 options to do the same thing.
So you just multiplied it by 51 because you added the 1 at the beginning?
I multiply it by 51 because that is what the formula says I should do. Up here. It's a little small now. The formula is very specific. It says if I start at 1 and I make jumps of 1, then use me. If that is not exactly what it looks like, you're going to have to tweak it a little bit before you can use me. And that's what we had to do. If you take that option, you never have to take that option. You can always just do the writing and the reverse and count how many. That's always going to work. Option 1 is always there. So choose which one you like. They have pros and cons. The formula, even the adapted formula, if I have to adapt the sequence and change it to be formula ready, even that is always going to be faster. But I need to know what I'm doing. The option 1 is always going to be the same length. It's a little longer, but it's still going to get the job done. I would just recommend against flipping back and forth between them. Pick one and stick with it. Now, if you are hesitant in any way, option 1 is your friend. Because, let me just see, we have, now, yeah, I was looking for something else. If I look, I think it was an exercise. There you are. There you are. Yeah, there you are. If I look at the exercises, exercise 314, number 1. 314, number 1. And I don't remember if I did that in the video or not. Let's just look at that. Now, I will say that these sum questions are definitely some of the most important ones, and chances are pretty high that that's a test question. There are definitely some that are more important than others. So let's see here. What was exercise? What? I just said it. 314. Hopefully it's 314 in your book. Number 1 says 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus boom, boom, boom. All the way to 100, I believe. Yes. Okay. Option 1, nothing wrong with it. Always going to work. I'm not going to give you something where the jump is different. The jump is always the same. And the option 1 only cares about that. If you are jumping from one number to the next by the same amount, it's good to go. So let's do that. If you hear loud kids in the background, I apologize. They don't have a volume control in any way. Write it in reverse. And I end at 2. Then 102 for this first pair. 102. Oh, another 102. They're all the same. That means I am on track. And if I call this sum S, then this is double the sum S. Question is how many? Oh, how many? How many? I'm actually asking you how many of these 102s are there?
Could there not be 50?
There are 50. And it's not the most difficult. You can say, well, if it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to 100, there would be 100 of them. By getting every even number, I'm getting half of it, so 50. But in other examples, that can be tricky. We're building up to that. That is not your 314. That is not your 314. It is your something, this exercise. So we can, if you're doing the independent studies version, then your book is going to be the same. The numbering might just be off by 1 or 2. This problem is still in that book, I'm very sure. But let me help you out and put this book in the chat right now. It's not big, it's only 3 meg. It is essentially the same. I think maybe if one has a typo and I fix it, then the numbering sort of has that rollover effect. So if you're confused, that's the one I'm looking at. 314. But this exercise is definitely somewhere. It might just be numbered something else. Regardless, that's the one we're doing. So it loses the formula seemingly completely in that it doesn't start at 1. It doesn't jump by 1. Screw that formula. I can just always do option 1. Why would I care about a formula? I don't. I don't need to care about a formula at all. The next part in this option 1 strategy is to then, well, I'm pretty much done, right? So the answer, if I have 50 of these 102s, well, that's repeated addition, that's multiplication. So my answer is 50 times 102 over 2. I get an answer that MathBot can help me with. 102 divided by 2. And I get 2,550. Nothing wrong with that. But I want to illustrate the pros and the cons to the formula. If you know what you're doing, the formula is definitely faster. But it's tricky to use that confidently in the beginning. So it is maybe an advanced option. I'll show you this once and then I'm not doing the formula anymore. Option 2. Because with the formula, I'm catering to very few people. I need to adapt my sum, which is this guy. How do I do that? I can take out a 2 as a factor, and then it's 1 plus 2 plus 3 all the way to 50. Now this is perfect for the formula. 50 times 51 over 2, and remember the times 2 there. Short, but not a favorite for when you are starting out. Again, pick a strategy, pick the one that's going to give you the most confidence moving forward. That you can go in like, oh, if there's a sum question, I know what I'm doing. I'm not going to freak out in any way. And there's more variety in the formula and how I need to adapt it. Whereas with option 1, there is some variety, only in this how many portion. The rest of it is extremely straightforward. So my confidence is much higher. That circle looked terrible. My confidence is much higher in option 1. So if you are in any way not sure, go with option 1. And then let's look for something a little more interesting. Let's see, was it only 311 that had these sums? Was there nothing else later on? We're going to have to just make up our own. Well, you can easily make up your own, right? Easily make up your own. And I'm happy to check it, send it to someone else, send it in the chat, the course chat. Can anyone do this? Let's make one up right now. Why not? Because that's definitely, if I had to pick one question, that is the most important one. Now, I'm not saying it's a guarantee that it's in the test, but
Hi, I have a question.
yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, so that formula, you just have to memorize it. You can't figure it out from the question or assemble the numbers into the formula. It's not self-evident.
Now, the whole point of a formula, and we did derive it with an option 1 strategy in the video, just leaving it general instead of having a 50 at the end, leave it as an n. You do option 1 to derive the formula, but the whole point of a formula is to shortcut the whole option 1 process. The tricky part is when it doesn't look perfectly set up for the formula, I need to tweak the question, so to speak, because the formula is only going to apply to a very specific looking sequence, and that can create some problems. If I'm not sure how to tweak it, and that seems complicated, I might as well just do option 1, since it's the same amount of work. So a formula is faster, but it's also very sort of specialized. It's not going to just directly apply to anything. It's only going to apply to a specific looking sequence. For example, if I have, I'm just trying to think what would be easy enough for us. Let's not make it too hard. Let's say we start with, let's go 13, 15, 17, and I'll stop at 101. Don't want to make it too overwhelming. It's a nice one. It's not super obvious. And if I were to adapt the formula, that is going to give people some problems because we're starting out, right? We're not sure. So I'm going to go option 1. So I have my sum right there. I'm not even going to bother writing it again. I will, however, flip it around. So the one before the last one is 99, then 97, and I'm going to end with 13. And I just randomly made this up. So if I add up the pairs, I get 114. I get 114. I get 114, which then tells me, oh yeah, this strategy is the way to go for sure. Question is, how many are there? How many? That is the pickle. Now, this is where some people have skill that others don't have. And it's not something I can necessarily explain. The more we work with numbers, the more we see variety, the better sort of a subconscious, it's not a feeling, but just an experience-based intuition. So maybe you have a good guess here. I have no guess. I have no idea because I don't have that skill. What do I do? I need a backup plan because I need to finish this. I need to find this number so I can finish the question. What do I do? What I like to do is a little table. So I need to essentially count these 114s. But instead of counting them, I can just count the numbers in the original sequence. And then the question is, what is the position of that last one? That's going to tell me exactly how many there are. I honestly don't know if it's 44. And even if I want to say yes, I need to be 100% sure before moving on. How do I become 100% sure? That is the issue. Now, some of you might think, it's obvious. I know what it is. Yeah, but it's not everyone. What do I do if I'm not one of those people? Which I'm not. I need to find a link between the position. I'm not going to do it here. I'm going to do it on the left. The position of the number in the original sequence and then the actual number in that position. So in position 1, I have a 13. In position 2, I have a 15. In position 3, I have a 17. In position 4, I would have a 19, and I would keep going all the way until I hit the number 101, and I'm trying to figure out what is that position. Because if I know that position, then I'm golden. That's exactly what I'm looking for, because the position counts them perfectly. So if I'm looking for how many, the last position will exactly be how many. So now I have to find what is the link between my position and the number in that position. Some rule for how to go from the position value to the number that corresponds to it, so that it works every time, so that I go from 2 with the same rule to 15, 3 with the same rule to 17, 4 with the same rule to 19. What could the rule be? That is the question. Now, I mean, there could be guess and checking here, right? I think something, if it works every time, then that's the rule. If it doesn't work every time, then that's not the rule. So guess and check is perfectly fine. My first answer doesn't have to be the right one. Does anyone have a suggestion for the rule? And then we can test it. Does it work every time? Then perfect. But instead of me giving it to you, I want us to think about it. Even if it takes longer, we get so much more benefit out of that. And then by using that rule, we'll see easily how to get this number. But it takes a little bit of guessing. Now, sometimes 1 isn't the easiest one. How can I go from 2 to 15 in a way that also works for the next one, and for the next one, and for the next one?
What I see for 2 is 13 plus 2.
Sorry, which one are you looking at? This one?
So for position 2, 13 plus 2.
13 plus 2.
And then position 3, I'm seeing 13 plus 2 plus 2.
13 plus 2 plus 2. So this one was just, the first one was just 13. Okay, does it
That's
work
right.
for 19 as well?
Yeah.
13
13 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2.
Okay, okay, I like it, I like it. Let me just make space, and this rule word was too low. I need to write some stuff there. Get out of my way. Okay, so I'm adding a certain number of 2's to a base of 13. Okay, so let's just jump after the first one. So here I'm adding one group of 2. Let's write it like that.
Yeah.
Here I'm adding 2 groups of 2. And here I'm adding 3 groups of 2. And I could say for the first one, I've added 0 groups of 2. So now I can see this column over here with the number of 2's that I'm adding matches almost perfectly to the position, in that the number of 2's that I'm adding is 1 less than the position value. Always 1 less. If the position is 3, the number of 2's I'm adding is 1 less. If the position is 4, the number of 2's I'm adding is 1 less. Now I've picked an example that is on the higher end, of course, right? So the table sometimes looks much easier than that. And in exercise, what was it? Where are we now? Work with me, book. Exercise 314, number 2, it was an easier table, but the issue was the same, trying to find a link between the position and so on. So that means to get 101, I'm going to have 13 plus question mark minus 1 times 2. Right? Just following the pattern.
Yeah.
What does that question mark then have to be? Well, I can take an equation approach. Let's write it out like this. I'm going to put it in a box because I feel a question mark on its own looks weird. But if I put a box around it, it looks perfect. I get 101. So I could subtract 13 on both sides. Whoops, not the 2. That was supposed to be a question mark. But if you're not comfortable with variables and equations, we are going to look at that at the end. And you can certainly guess and check your way through this. This is now on the higher end of the difficulty. Sorry, this doesn't look like an equal. There we go. 101 minus 13. I can't do everything. Look how much I did. Okay, you did this. Fair enough. So I didn't do all of this. Fair enough. 101 minus 13. I want to get people to participate.
To move it over to the other side.
Fine, I'll ask MathBot. He does let me down sometimes too, though. Oh, even MathBot doesn't want to tell me. It's cold, MathBot. Wow. MathBot says, screw you, do it yourself. Fine, I will. It is 88.
Yeah.
I was just trying to get people to participate. Now, what would you want to do next? I can multiply the 2 in, maybe. That's not the worst idea. It's not the only either. And then I can add 2 on both sides. And again, if this makes you feel uncomfortable, don't worry. The last part of the course is there for you. And so I have to divide both sides by 2. And then question mark, I'll squeeze it in here, is 45. If I can make better equal signs. Come on. There we go. 45. Oh, MathBot's finally decided to join us. So it shows that it's tricky sometimes. It's tricky to get that how many question. I can very easily be off by 1, the same as what was done in the video with this number 2 in the exercises. It's tricky. And then I can finish it over here, let's say, since I want to see the whole question. I can then say S is 45 groups of 114 over 2 and finish it, and whatever the answer is, it is. Let's ask MathBot. He says 2565. So it's not the easiest question. I wanted to make a problem that I know we should be able to do, but it's definitely on the higher end. I'm building up to that. Now, yes, there's a downside to this option 1, right? Look how long it is. There was a lot to do. And sometimes the how many question is a tricky one, and I don't want to guess. I want to be 100% sure. Sometimes I'm 100% sure, like the problem ones here, where like number 2, if I go 2 to 50, I know how many there are. There are 49. But sometimes it is far less obvious, and I need to have a backup plan. What am I going to do? Am I just going to guess and be okay with that? I'm not. I need to have a backup plan for when it gets tricky, and what works for me surprisingly often, actually always. I like it in column form. That's just my preference. Finding a link between position and the number, because the positions count how many there are. So finding the last position, if I can find that link, I can find the last position, and that tells me how many there are. But admittedly not the easiest thing. You could have gone the formula route. You would just have to subtract 11. Let's do that. Maybe you want to see it. Maybe you like that option. Let's do it. Options are good, but don't feel you should flip back and forth between them. What did I have? 13? How do I not remember this? 13 plus 15 plus 17 all the way to 101. The alternative, to be more efficient, I'm going to have to rely on a formula. That's just the trade-off that I'm making. Now, how do I bring in a sequence starting at 1 and jumping by 1? Otherwise, I can't use the formula. Now, the jumps are 2 here. So I'm going to have to... what am I going to do? I'm hesitant when I do this. How obvious is it to know what to do? I don't know if I should. I'm running the risk of confusing more people. Crossroads here. I'm going to leave it because I don't want to encourage this option. And if you have a pretty good grasp, feel free to double check and send me your answer. But doing it here, I feel might be a bad idea. Based on my experience, it's better to, even though this looks way more intimidating, if you trust that you can adapt every sequence to a formula, then it's a little more risky. Because if you then come across one and you don't know how to change it, you don't have any backup plan. But if you have option 1, that is always going to work. So if you want to try the formula, try and do it on your own. Send it to me. I can confirm it. I just maybe don't want to push that too much. Sorry, continue.
Could we go over problem 3.18?
3.18. In this book, mine, the coconut one? Oh.
Yeah.
An island has no currency. It instead has the following exchange rate. 50 bananas is the same as 20 coconuts. 30 coconuts is the same as 12 fish, 100 fish, 1 hammock. How many bananas equal 1 hammock? Okay. So the 1 hammock here is 100 fish. I just have to slowly link them. So I have to take the 100 fish to a certain number of coconuts, and then that number of coconuts to a certain number of bananas, right? Now, there are different approaches here, all essentially the same. It depends if I'm going to be okay with fractions or decimals, or I want to avoid all fractions and all decimals. That's really the key. And I think in my answer key, I may have gone the second route to make it more appealing at an elementary school. Maybe we can do that. I'm just thinking what would be the nicest version. How would you want to proceed? I mean, I definitely don't want to do this problem if you haven't tried it yet. So what would you do as a first step? And we can build off that. That might be a better way to go, because for many of these, me just doing it teaches nothing. I want to hear if you have any ideas, what could you do first? Not the whole question. What is a very first step? What could we do? And
I
yeah,
guess
yeah.
seeing like how many hundred fish is like how many coconuts.
Yeah, so let's just forget the whole question. Let's just focus on getting to coconuts. I need a brand new page for sure. And I'm just thinking, often with these, there's more than one way, and it's a question of what is the easiest way to understand. So one hammock will correspond to 100 fish. And 12 fish, let's maybe put it over here, maybe, correspond to 30 coconuts. Coconuts. Okay, how do I link them? How do I link them? Now I could certainly simplify the fish to coconut ratio or connection. So equivalently, if 12 fish correspond to 30 coconuts, then 4 fish would correspond to how many coconuts?
Is it 10?
10 coconuts. Just breaking it up into groups of 3, then I have to break the coconuts up into groups of 3 as well. Now this one makes it easier, but they are equivalent. This one is nicer. Why? Because now I can see how many groups of 4 fish fit into 100 fish. So in here, how many groups of 4 fish can go into 100? Let's say, let's write that out. How many groups of 4 fish can fit into 100 fish? Well, that's 100 divided by 4. That's the whole definition of division. 25. Let me not write it. Let's write it over there. 25, right? So that means fitting into 100 fish being equivalent to 1 hammock, I need 25 coconuts. 25 groups of 10 coconuts. Let me write it over here. How many groups? 25 groups. So that means that 1 hammock is the same as 25 groups of 4 fish. Of course, that's 100 fish, which is the same as 25 groups of 10 coconuts. Coconuts. A lot more writing to explain this. Does that make sense so far?
Maybe could you go over how you got like I'm confused by like the 25 groups of coconuts, like that sentence.
Okay, you're happy with the 12 fish, 30 coconuts being equivalent to 4 fish, 10 coconuts.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just doing that to avoid fractions, honestly. So now I know that I'm working with 100 fish.
Okay.
And I can break that 100 fish into 25 groups of 4, because 4 times 25 is 100.
Okay.
Why do I want to do that? Because then I'm imagining actually doing it. As I'm saying this, I'm imagining the 100 fish being split into little baskets. Each one contains 4 fish. That's my best attempt at a basket. Feel free to mock and laugh, and so on. And then I'm going to take that basket and bring in 10 coconuts. Take that basket out, bring in 10 coconuts, because they're equivalent. Take out that basket, bring in 10 coconuts. Take out that basket, bring in 10 coconuts. How many coconuts do I have here? I have 25 of these basket groups, each one now containing 10 coconuts. So that's 250 coconuts.
Okay, that makes more sense.
And then I'll just sort of repeat the process to the next portion, which is actually much easier because the 20 coconuts already fit into 250. So that's actually much easier. But I want to leave it a little bit open so I don't do all of it for you. Now, it's certainly not the only way. And if you are comfortable with unit conversion methods, which is not expected, there's definitely a shortcut. But trying to think as an at an elementary school level where they don't have all that experience, I can relate it back to uh, to groups and the basic concept of multiplication and division, trying to pull it down to the basics, where you don't need anything fancy to do a shortcut or anything like that. And you can still get a lot of benefit from a question like this. So I know there's more to do here, which is now sort of repeating the process, taking the 250 coconuts to bananas, but just following the exact same idea. Would you be able to handle the rest? And you can, of course, send me your answer and we can check it and whatever you need, right?
Yeah, sure. Also, I was just wondering, could we go over problem 323? It's focused on like the gallons and
Oh,
like,
yes, yes. Good thing you mentioned that. So, again, here, this kind of question is one of the important ones. And we have so few of them. I think we have 2 problems and then the exercise that I don't want to. It's one of those questions where once you see it, it's over, kind of. The mystery's gone. And it's very important that we spend some time and struggle with it a little bit. But so it doesn't feel too overwhelming. Initially, it feels so. What's the setup here? We have 2 containers, no markings, no shortcuts, no eyeballing it, nothing. If I fill one, it holds 8 gallons. If I fill the other one, it holds 5 gallons. That's all I know. I can transfer water and have as much water as I want, dump it out, refill it, do whatever I need to do. How can I end up with exactly 4 gallons? So let's draw a little picture here. 8 gallons and 5 gallons. Okay, let's make a new page again. Okay, so what was this number? 23. Problem 323. I have an 8-gallon container and a 5-gallon container. if I fill them up. And my target is to get 4 gallons exactly. Now, initially it might seem as if I'm just going to have to randomly fill and transfer and dump and just make sure I understand the question first. So for example, I could fill the 8-gallon jug or container. When I transfer it over to the 5 gallons, I'm left with exactly 3 gallons in the 8-gallon container. Let's call it container 1 and container 2. And in doing that, I can create other quantities. But it feels a little random. I just have to transfer and fill and dump and transfer again and hope I stumble onto the answer. Not quite, not quite, though there is definitely a guess and check element here. The only strategy that I can really suggest to give me some direction instead of just randomly guess and checking is to think, well, okay, let's suppose I have done a sequence of things and I'm left with 4 gallons. What could that look like? So the end scenario. So let's suppose someone hides behind a curtain, they do it, they pull the curtain back, oh, magically they have the result. You don't know how it happened. But the end result is going to look like one of two things. There's going to be 4 gallons in container 1 with container 2 empty, or container 1 is empty and container 2 is going to have 4 gallons. That's going to happen. Right? That's what the end result looks like. And because both of them can contain 4 gallons, I don't know which one is going to end up being the one that has the 4 gallons. I can certainly transfer back and forth between them, sure. So now I ask myself, what
so
is...
the 4 gallons, sorry, so the
Yeah,
4
no.
gallons has to be in one container?
It's extremely unlikely that it's going to be split.
Okay, so it's not
But
going to be 3 and 1 or 2 and 2?
yeah, maybe that's definitely the end result, right? That's what I want to end up with. I want to have a measured 4 gallon amount.
Okay.
Now the question, maybe that is linked to what you are asking, is what could it look like right before I finish? So what is the scenario, the possible scenario right before this? I'm going to do something, finish. What does it have to look like for me to then finish the problem? Well, now I do have some more options here. Now remember, the container 1 has a max of 8. Container 2 has a max of 5. So one thing that could result in this left scenario, this left end scenario, is to have a full container 1. Now please stop me if something is not clear. But this strategy definitely helps. And in container 2, I have 1 gallon. If I can get to this situation, then finishing it is a formality. Why? I know, speechless. It's amazing. I love this container question. I'm trying to give myself some idea, some direction. Instead of aiming for what they ask, I'm aiming for one step before I get what they ask. And that's going to give me more options, you'll see. Why?
Because,
Sorry, continue.
I guess if you dumped like the 8-gallon water into like container 2, it would equal 5. So like you don't really need the lines on it to know like how much is gonna be like left in.
Well, there are no lines, so I don't have a choice. Because in container 2 there's space for 4 gallons, a full container 1 transferred over to container 2 will transfer exactly 4 gallons. 4 plus 4 is 8, and I'll be left with the end scenario right above it.
Yeah.
Which means I don't actually need a full container 1 because I have an unlimited amount of water. I can just fill it whenever I want. So equivalently, well, it's not equivalent, but with the same level of difficulty, I'm really aiming for 1 gallon somewhere. Then I can also finish. I would move it. I would make sure it's in container 2, full container 1, transfer it over, bam, done. And sometimes that is easier because I can also look at the end scenario on the right. Now, in the end scenario, those two are pretty much the same. I have 4 gallons. But I can get the right one in perhaps a different way. How can I get the right end scenario that's different from the previous one? Well, container 1 has 8 gallons. Container 2 has a total of 5. How can I get that? One way, and it's perhaps not the only way, let me know if you see another one. Like I said, I don't remember these answers, which is a good thing, I think, because I can sort of think about it in a way that you would, is to have 7 gallons of water in container 1 and a full, oh, that was a wobbly container, and a full container 5. Container 5? No, there's no container 5. There's only container 2. It has 5 gallons. How does that? Yeah, continue. Sorry.
I'm just wondering how you know that there's 7 gallons in container 1. Like if there's no like.
No. I don't know. I'm saying if I can get to that situation somehow magically.
Okay.
Then I can finish it. So that's the first thing I need to make sure of is, do I see how to finish? If someone puts this in front of you, with this amount of water in each, can you finish and get 4 gallons? That's the first question.
Okay.
So I need to make sure that everyone understands how this second scenario will get me to this top right end scenario. And I therefore finish the question or the puzzle. Because my container 2 is full, I have exactly 1 gallon space in container 1, so I transfer it over, I'm left with 4 gallons. Does everyone see that would be a pretty much a finished situation? It's a formality. This is not easy in any way. I'm just trying to think, well, instead of looking for one end scenario, I now have a couple of options for the scenario right before the end scenario. And because container 2 is full, I can fill it anytime I want. I don't need it to be full. I can make an empty container. I can have an empty container 2. And that would still be as good as the previous scenario. Because I would then just fill container 2, transfer it over, be left with 4 gallons. But the benefit of doing it this way is sort of working backwards, but I can't keep doing this. I'm just going to do it for one step before the end. But the benefit now is, instead of aiming originally for a single end scenario of having 4 gallons, regardless of where it is, that doesn't help me. I now have 2 things I can aim for. I have to somehow either get a 1 gallon amount or a 7 gallon amount. And those aren't the same anymore. So now I've sort of spread my net a little bit wider, that there are two things. And as I'm transferring and guessing and checking and doing my trial and error, as soon as I hit one of those two, I know I'm finished. So my scope is a little bit wider now. It's a little bit more forgiving in that I'm not aiming, hoping to get one specific scenario. I'm now looking for two. And I can, if I really wanted to, go one back, but it gets a little tedious to do that. From one scenario to two as a target makes a humongous difference. So now, and I'm going to leave this up to you, unfortunately, for now, even if you I choked up there. Such a beautiful question. Even if you only get time on the weekend, it is immensely beneficial to think about this. And now I can think, okay, I know what I'm looking for. I'm aiming for a 1 gallon amount. And again, it doesn't matter where that 1 gallon sits, right? As soon as I have measured 1 gallon, I'm as good as done, because that puts me in this left second to last scenario, and I know how to finish it. As soon as I get an amount of 7 gallons, it's going to have to be in container 1, I'm as good as done as well. But I now have two options. And now I keep those in mind as I'm transferring an 8-gallon container and a 5-gallon container. Yeah, I can make 3 gallons, and maybe I can then do something with that, and maybe I can get 6 gallons, and so on, as I transfer and dump and fill and so on. But it makes a huge difference having two targets instead of one. Excuse me. And just playing around with that a little bit, it's not going to take as long. I doubt it would even take you 10 minutes. But even if it does, it is very beneficial to struggle with something, even if you don't get anywhere. In your mind, there has been some development. Some things have happened. Just keeping that activity and that thinking happening. So because we only have so few, you can do this strategy for the other ones as well, but sort of spreading your net a little wider. Instead of aiming for one target, aim for two. I can go one step further, but I don't think that's very beneficial. Two targets will get the job done. So play with it a little bit. Even if you have, maybe this opens it up a little bit more, and you have to just trust that things do get better, even though you feel frustrated sometimes. All right. Any last words? Because this is pretty much the end of our session. Again, send emails. If you have a partial answer, you want me to check, are you on the right track? I'm happy to do all of that. Don't feel isolated. Use the chat. The course chat is there for you to use. Check with other people. Post an answer. See if this is what they got. Use it. Don't be like we would in a classroom. In a classroom, you would work in groups. You would compare notes. Use it. I don't want anyone to feel isolated, and that's where frustration really becomes negative.
Are we able to converse with you over this app? I don't want to waste other people's time because I'm so confused by this water situation.
The first question is, do you understand the sort of parameters of the question? We have to understand the problem before worrying about finding an answer, right? Do we understand what we're allowed and not allowed to do with this kind of question? That is the very first thing. So let's do that here, just in case other people have the same issue. And once we understand the question, it's really up to you to just spend a little bit of time on this, especially with this new information I've added in terms of strategy. But we have to make sure right here whether we understand how the question works, what the question is saying.
Yeah, like
Hopefully that's not one of you crying out of frustration.
No, it's me. No.
That's okay then. So are there any questions specifically to what we are allowed to do in terms of these containers and water? That is the main issue.
Yeah, I understand that you can have as much water as you want and you can dump and pour, but I have written here that from what you had before, you can take 8 gallons, the 8-gallon bucket that's full, and pour it into the 5-gallon, and then it'd be full. But then you're not ending up with the 4 gallons of water. You have 5 gallons of water.
Yeah, so for example, and this isn't a continuation of what we did here, in terms to highlight what I can do is I can fill container 1, fill container 1, and container 2 is empty, and then I can transfer. What would that look like? Well, I have 8 in here. Then container 2 would be full with 5, and container 1 would have 3 left if I transfer. And then I can maybe dump container 2 to make space for another move that I want to do. Does that make sense? So in this way, I can get an amount of 3 gallons, for example, even though I don't have a 3-gallon container. So
Yeah, that makes
that's the
sense.
transfer idea. Now I can maybe dump container 2. And I mean, on purpose here, I'm trying to not reveal the answer. I can dump container 2, then maybe move this over so it looks like this. And then maybe I can fill container 1 again. Now I have a gap of 2, and I can transfer that over and be left with 6. So I can create different amounts that way. But I just want to make sure everyone understands the question. Then it's a matter of playing around. If I do this, oh, I can get a 6. Is that better or worse? Knowing that I'm aiming for one of these two scenarios. I'm aiming for one of the top two. And you might just stumble onto it. You might recognize something. Ooh, I make 6, and then I maybe make 7. I'm getting the hang of this. But it takes some playing around with it. There's no shortcut to that, unfortunately. The best shortcut I have is aiming for 2 things instead of 1. But even it's what makes this so tricky is sometimes you are one step away, but you just don't realize it. So you're welcome to sort of send me a partial answer and say, how close am I? Am I on track? And I can let you know. But there's no shortcut to you struggling through this. That's the only way you're going to get better, unfortunately. Not the news you want to hear, but it's the truth.
I just had a question before we end. So since we're done like the first 3 sections, we could start working on like the portfolio assignment, like the first one.
I mean, technically, you can work on those worksheets whenever you want. They're not going to be a difficulty where, oh, I need to do this water jug question before I can do a worksheet question, right? They're elementary schools, so they're going to be easier. It's more just to check to see, can I do these worksheets?
Oh, okay.
And I try and make them as relatable to the different parts as possible. It's not going to be, now some of them are, like, for example, if there's a worksheet on fractions, it might benefit you to have done our fraction discussion first if you're shaky on fractions.
Oh, okay.
So some of them transfer that easily. For the first one, it's better to leave them to make sure afterwards, but some worksheets will perhaps for you require a discussion we've done, and some won't. So for safety, you can leave them at the end. Yeah. So you should, excuse me, you should look at the first homework assignment because that refers to part 1, and we finished part 1. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, feel free to send me emails, use the chat, because then other students, other people can help as well, perhaps. Like, oh, I had a similar problem, and even then, you don't feel isolated as much. Uh, Otherwise, I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Good luck in your studies, and hopefully, you don't get too frustrated. Things will get better.